Hello and welcome to our AstroDharma Facebook Live on Scorpio, its ruler Pluto, and the 8th house. Thanks for joining us, and may all our efforts benefit all beings. So, what can we say about Scorpio, Pluto, and the 8th house? Well, these are some of my favorite parts of the zodiac. That's probably because my sun is in the 8th house and I have Venus in Scorpio, conjunct Neptune, mind you. Oh my gosh, that's so self-revelatory. I must have done a fair bit of work because Scorpio, Pluto, and the 8th house love secrets. And it takes a lot of spiritual practice and inner work, scorpionic work like therapy and psychology and transformative work such as in plant medicine. It takes a lot of that kind of work to get past the secretive side of Scorpio, Pluto, and the 8th house and find strength and vulnerability, which is what this sign's transformation is all about. Every sign has a different kind of transformation. So, if you're new to AstroDharma, I hope you enjoy this live stream, and I invite you to find out more at our URL, planetdharma.com/AstroDharma. And there we have some free goodies for you. I'm not going to tell you what, and some more information about our really excellently transformative course on AstroDharma. Well, Scorpio, this is the 8th sign of the zodiac, and Scorpio is an interesting sign for a lot of reasons. And one is that it's the only sign in the zodiac to have 3 different symbols. So the first symbol is the most obvious one, the scorpion. And the scorpion has this, what it's known for is its really lethal, painful sting. And that's what people with strong scorpionic energy, I'm not sure if they're known for it so much because it is a secretive sign. But if you know any people with strong scorpionic energy, you'll get to know about that side of them eventually. It's an intense sign, loves intensity, it loves passion, and it also is a very sensitive sign. It's a water sign. All the water signs are sensitive, bordering on perhaps highly intuitive and psychic. And Scorpio is so sensitive that it protects itself with this stinger. So usually if you're involved somehow with a Scorpio, you don't notice the sensitivity so much because it's such a secretive sign. And it's easy to get distracted by the more passionate side of Scorpio. But then when the stinger comes out, you know that's a sign that they felt vulnerable and were afraid of being hurt. And so this is what Scorpio's transformation is all about, as I said, is learning to find strength in that vulnerability. And when Scorpio can get some perspective on it, everyone has Scorpio in our charts, for example, and people with strong Scorpio energy aren't the only ones who are feeling vulnerable or afraid of getting hurt. Once they get that space in the mandala, in the picture, then the symbol transforms to an eagle, because then they've got a higher perspective and realize it's not all about me and my pain and my passion and my feelings, that this is a pretty universal human experience. Let's see, then, when Scorpio learns more about its own vulnerability and sees that as a window into the universal nature of the human experience, that this is something we're all going through all the time, of feeling hurt and trying to recover from that. And in order to recover from that, we have to really let go of this notion of my pain and I've been done wrong by someone else. We have to let go of that personal obsession. Scorpios are known for being obsessive. And when Scorpio can let go of that and just realize the cycles of transformation are just cycles, and in a sense we're dying all the time and then being reborn all the time, then its symbol's transformed into the phoenix, which is known for diving into a volcano, the hot molten lava, and being burned to ashes, but then bursting forth and flying out, reborn and refreshed. So Scorpios are people with a strong Scorpio energy, strong 8th house, or emphasize Pluto in our charts. We have this cyclical nature of dying and being reborn. And early in our life, it's like crash and burn, crash and burn, crash and burn. Very painful, very unpleasant, very messy. And with a lot of inner work and spiritual practice, it becomes more this phoenix transformation and the natural cycles of life and death and rebirth. And that takes us to the 8th house, which is the area in our chart that Scorpio rules. So in the 7th house, we talked about one-on-one relationships, and they're loving and pleasant, and they're about harmony and self and other and beauty. And the 8th house takes this much deeper, like what's actually happening beneath that Libran surface. So what's happening in the bedroom, for example? What's happening in the power dynamics? That's what the 8th house is about. So it traditionally rules birth and sex and death, and by association, anything taboo. It also rules other people's money, a kind of taboo, a kind of power situation, as well as open enemies. So think about maybe your ex-spouse or your ex-business partner, someone you're really, really close to, and you got so close that it kind of couldn't handle the pressure of the intensity, and it crashed and it burned, and the positive rebirth didn't quite happen. The good news is that with inner work, the positive transformation can happen, and we don't have open enemies. Let's see, 8th house. So these are the areas of life where the boundary between this material world that we can see and observe and this other world, or this sense for something mysterious and numinous and scary, because we can't see it and we can't quite understand it. So the 8th house rules that boundary between those worlds. And this is something we often experience through the experience of birth, or the experience of sex, a certain kind of sex maybe, and the experience of death. And we're touched so profoundly by how much there is to this life and this universe that we don't yet understand, and how wondrous that is. And so this is a great house for midwives and surgeons and psychologists and end-of-life caregivers, anyone who specializes in those secret or taboo or numinous places. Someone who is involved with rituals, for example. If you're just joining us, welcome to Scorpio and the 8th house and Pluto, this month's Facebook live stream for AstroDharma. And to learn more, please check out planetdharma.com/. /AstroDharma. For more information about our awesome AstroDharma course and some secret free gifts for you, I'm not going to tell you what they are because we're talking about Scorpio. Let's move on to Pluto, Scorpio's ruler. So this dwarf planet was named after the god of the underworld. And he's most famous for abducting Persephone and making her his queen. But what we don't usually hear about is that he wasn't a bad guy necessarily. Being king of the underworld doesn't automatically make you a bad guy. He was manipulated by Venus and Cupid, and they shot him with the arrow of desire. And the first person that he saw was Persephone. So he was kind of driven wild with his desire, and he had to have her and take her home with him. So the significant thing about this story for our purposes is just the power dynamics that are at play in that story. So he was driven wild with desire, but it kind of wasn't his fault. He was manipulated by somebody else who was really to blame, but hardly anybody knows that story. So Pluto, Scorpio, and the 8th house have a lot to do with power dynamics. And these tend to be areas in our chart where we experience fear. We fear, for example, that we may be manipulated, or that something may happen that makes us lose control, or someone may get control over us and abduct, if not our physical person, our hearts. And then what's going to happen? We don't know. And that's why these areas are so scary and so taboo. And it's only by diving right into them and surrendering to that self-immolation that we're able to integrate those energies and transform them in healthy ways and come out like the phoenix and be able to use these energies to our advantage, to benefit all beings, to alleviate suffering. Otherwise, there's a good chance that we may lose control, or we may be manipulated, or we may not know what happened. Something happened to us and we lost control. So now we know the secrets for being able to work with power is basically about being able to give up power. It's a bit counterintuitive, but that's life for you. So where we have Pluto in our charts, if you had to sum up Pluto, the planet Pluto, what Pluto is about, it's about transformation through destruction. So we think transformation, yay, destruction, boo. So wherever we have Pluto is a part of our lives where we may fear being destroyed. And so we can tend to be very protective in that area or avoid those areas. And the outer planets, they move very slowly, and so they're generational. So my whole generation has Pluto in Virgo, and I think people around 30 all have Pluto in Scorpio. So a whole generation shares that kind of energy. But where it's different for each individual is what house you have it in. So that will tell you which part of your life it will show up in for you. So because the energies are so strong, transformation through destruction is quite natural to want to avoid them. And the vast majority of people may spend our entire lives avoiding them and never integrate those energies. So it's a real spiritual warrior who's able to dive into those depths and learn to surrender in order to come out in a sense more powerful. But it's not personal power, it's more transcendental power or transpersonal power, being able to work with the natural energies of those amazing life forces of birth and sex and death and transformation. Okay, so these are some of the key points of Scorpio, 8th house, and Pluto. Let's see if there are any questions.
Well, there it is. So we have a question from Jazz.
Hi, Jazz.
Jazz is asking, how do you integrate Pluto in Scorpio conjunction on midheaven? It's out in the world, it's visible, and feels on the public side of my life, the underworld churnings and transformations. What's a reasonable approach to own this kind of deep transformation in the public eye, to create sacred space that doesn't necessarily feel so private? My Sun and South Node are also in the 8th house, so it does feel like an incredibly potent aspect of the journey to integrate.
Oh, yeah, a lot of Scorpio. Gosh. Okay, let's see. Well, because you have South Node in Scorpio, South Node is about our karma, what we're born into. And so I would guess that your upbringing was somehow rather scorpionic. Maybe a lot of things happening beneath the surface that nobody talked about, or a lot of power dynamics in the home, perhaps. So the thing about South Node is we have to let go of the South Node and move into our North Node in order to integrate it and to experience the more positive sides of the South Node. Did she say what sign the South Node and Sun are in?
South Node and Sun, no, it just says in the 8th house.
Okay. So whatever the opposite of that is, that's going to be your first task, is to go into that, to really make the effort to move into your North Node. Because that South Node is going to kind of stymie your ability to really step into the heroine of your journey, which is the Sun in the 8th house. Those are big shoes to grow into. So whatever is the North Node is in, really focus on embodying that, bringing that into your life more. And then that'll make the Scorpio on the midheaven. Is that right? Scorpio on the midheaven? Yeah, that'll make that come more naturally. And to answer your more specific questions, embodying that's a really great placement for anything to do with psychology, like group psychology, creating a ritual space for people in order to process things. If you think about it, meaningful rituals are, I wouldn't say absent in our world, but they're not very common. When you think that most traditional cultures in the world have very important rites of passage at different points in people's lives, and that mainstream Western North American culture does not. So there's that thing that people long for, and I think we replace it with things like tattooing and piercing and drugs, and all those things can be helpful. And I think if they either took place in a ritual setting, or if there were a ritual that marked those rites of passage, that would be far more powerful. And so doing that as a profession is a way to bring that sacred space, that personal and private experience, more into the world, which is what the 10th house is about. So I hope that gives you some food for thought about that. And you're welcome to follow up in the chat if you have more questions about that. Yes.
So we have a question from Dan. And he says, I have Pluto in Scorpio in the 12th house, and also Scorpio rising in opposition to a Moon-Mars conjunction in Taurus in the 6th house. Any comments on this?
Pluto and Scorpio in the 12th?
Correct.
Okay, and Scorpio rising. Oh gosh, yeah, wow, that's juicy. Moon Mars conjunction in 6th in Taurus. Okay. So feelings, Moon and Mars together. Moon is feelings, Moon is relationships, Moon is the body, and Moon is our mother and our relationship with our mother. The Moon packs a lot. And you have that conjunct Mars. So Mars is that masculine energy and that aggression, both healthy and not so healthy, or assertion. So those are going to be really mixed for you. Probably a lot of power dynamics around feelings and relationships, and especially because you have Scorpio rising. So we've said Scorpio has a connection with power and how power is used. So if those are opposite each other, if that were a string on an instrument, that string would be getting plucked a fair bit. And you have that Moon in Mars in the 6th house, the house of service, the house of vocation. And since I know that you're a therapist and you specialize in intense, a sort of unusually intense clientele, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, but people have been incarcerated and people who are at risk of suicide. So that's a really great way to make relationships and power dynamics and aggression and turn that into an act of service. Because that must be what you're working with the vast majority of your clientele, right? Especially since so many of them are men. So how to transform these male phenomena, we'll say. Women can have them too, obviously, but how to transform these male phenomenon and in a safe and caring kind of way, which is what the Moon would bring into it. Anything that's in the 12th house is part of our womb experience. So we do a really awesome course on womb and birth called Karma, Womb, and Transcendence, where we spend a lot of time contacting what those first 9 months were like, and what we have in the 12th house points to what those 12 months were like. And it's really useful to speak to our mothers, if they're still alive and willing to talk about it, about what their experience was like when they were pregnant with us. And there might be some you might learn some revelatory things. So what she went through and what you went through with her during those 9 months. And with Pluto there, it was probably a bit of a kicker, something intense, something frightening, because it's that transformation through destruction. She may have been afraid of the birth going awry or something like that. So when you think that was imprinted on us as a fetus, how formative that would be to our worldview. And the 12th house is tricky. It was, imprinted when we were still in the womb, so we weren't conscious. And so things that are in the 12th house are very challenging for us to bring into our full consciousness. It takes a lot of inner work and a lot of spiritual practice. So, you're doing all the right things. But you've heard a lot about what kinds of themes those are. So happy spelunking. Yes.
We have a question from Dave Basiroy. He says, I'm curious for your thoughts on how to feel nurtured with an 8th house moon in Taurus. I can relate to feeling nurtured by some scorpionic things, particularly sex and deep emotional connection, but how would this relate to the more secretive, taboo, or destructive elements of Scorpio? What truly nurtures often seems hazy or unclear in my mind.
Moon in Taurus in the 8th, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, Moon in Taurus in the 8th. Okay. Well, Taurus, as we know, and the moon too are really, well, Taurus is all about sensing. So there's that kind of wonderful sensing experience of sexuality that you're referring to, and sensuality in general. It's good to branch it out beyond just sex and get more into any kind of sensing, because sex is already so intense. It can carry more, we can put too much on it for it to be able to carry, right? Sex wasn't meant to carry all of our sensual desires and sensual interests. And I'm not saying that it does for you, but this is for everybody. The moon, so Taurus is about sensing, moon is about feelings. So you've got that sensing together with that feeling. So there's that feeling nurtured through sensuality as well as, and sexuality as a part of that. So I think the thing is here is that the 8th house brings this element of power into it. And this is always scary. There's just no, not always scary, until we've done an enormous amount of spiritual work and inner work. There's always going to be an element of scariness to it. And there will always be an element of vulnerability to it. And so I think there's maybe an element of power dynamics in relationship and sexuality that we don't hear about quite so often from you, compared to the pleasure of the sensuality in the sex. So I think exploring the power dynamics and finding that ability to get comfortable with vulnerability will yield. It'll make the moon and the Taurus far more pleasurable. I'm trying to dangle the carrot in front of you to help motivate you, because otherwise it doesn't sound like quite as much fun. This is where the English may have an advantage, because they've got this long history of sadomasochism and things like leather boots, which we don't see so often in Canada, maybe because it's too cold. Yeah.
So we have 2 last questions. Leslie says, I have an abundance of Scorpio. I struggle with the sting. I think the intensity is a strength and my weakness. Any help with this?
Yes. Let's see. A lot of Scorpio. Okay. I forget all the things that you have in Scorpio. I remember you told me just recently, but I forget what they are. So that the devil, so to speak, is in the details. So it's helpful to know the specifics, and that can that helps us untangle the tangle. So if you're able to chat in some of the specifics, it'll be easier to respond to your question. But I think we all have to find places where it's safe to be intense, and we need to identify when the intensity is just burning too hot. Because when it burns too hot, it burns out. And other people and ourselves and our relationships can be collateral damage. So part of the trick with all of these power dynamics is being able to adjust the dials. Turn down the heat, even when we don't feel like turning down the heat. You know, just knowing when it's got too hot and introducing space into the situation. So then that prevents the stings from getting out of control. So I hope that takes you a little somewhere. And we can follow up in the chat if you like.
And fortunately she can't access it on her phone right now, but
okay.
She could chat later. Martin has a question saying he has moon in Scorpio, 5th house, square sun in Aquarius. Pluto in third in Leo, opposition Sun, Mercury in Aquarius. I'm not sure what the question is.
Is there no question?
There's no question.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so what's in Scorpio?
So Moon in Scorpio.
Moon in Scorpio is too afraid of being vulnerable. So then we don't get questions, and if we don't get questions, we don't get answers. So yeah, that's a hard thing for Scorpio and 8th house and pronounced Pluto. Yeah, it's not easy to be vulnerable. So yeah, strength and vulnerability. That's a really good phrase to remember for this sensitive trio. And I think we're at time, are we? Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been fun. This has been Scorpio, the 8th house, and Pluto. And please, if you enjoyed this as much as I did, check out planetdharma.com/AstroDharma, because we put together a really awesome course on AstroDharma. It is very cool. It's very helpful. It teaches about all this stuff and how to learn how to read your own chart and how to read other people's charts and how to work with your chart, which is the most important thing, because it can help us transform very profoundly. And there's some secret free gifts on that webpage too, just to show you that yeah, we can give away our power and enjoy it. Thanks for joining us, and join us next month for Sagittarius. And may all our efforts benefit all beings.